Let's move our attention though to rather more important issues. Let's speak now to the Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary, Robert Jenrick. Good morning to you.
Hi, Julia. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's talk first of all about what you're here to initially speak about, and that's rough sleeping. And we've seen obviously this huge initiative when we got into the lockdown, people told to go and stay in their homes. Of course, we saw thousands of people didn't have homes to stay in, and so emergency accommodation was found for those sleeping rough on the sleeps. But now the government is hoping to use this opportunity to basically get all of these people off the streets for good. What are you going to do?
Well, that's absolutely right. At the start of the pandemic, we were particularly worried about people sleeping rough on the streets. Naturally, they're very vulnerable without a roof over their head, but also 60 or 70% of people sleeping rough have severe respiratory conditions, so they're clinically vulnerable to coronavirus as well. So we worked to offer them accommodation, help them to get off the streets, and that was hugely successful. 90% of rough sleepers are now accommodated in temporary accommodation where local councils and charities are caring for them. But we have to think about what we do next. And so this week, we're announcing that we're going to be bringing forward 6,000 homes that we're going to offer to those people so that they can move on into better accommodation and begin to rebuild their lives.
Although, of course, we know that often for the people sleeping rough, them being on the streets is almost a symptom rather than a part of their problems. We've got, people who's fleeing abusive relationships, but also people with alcohol, mental health and drug problems. And so they've got a whole variety of issues, which are the reasons why they end up losing the accommodation they previously had. Is finding them the accommodation itself, is that the solution, or is there much more that needs to be done? I'm afraid I can't hear the Housing Secretary at the moment. I think also my lovely listener can't hear him as well. Obviously, the vagaries of us all speaking to each other from our various homes. We'll do our best to get Robert Jenrick's line back up. But as he was just saying, 6,000 new homes are going to be made available within the next year or so to help those people who are currently in accommodation, emergency accommodation. Apologies, Mr. Jenrick. I thought our line just dropped a little bit. But I was just saying whether finding housing, finding a roof over people's heads isn't going to be the only solution because they've got a myriad other problems.
That's absolutely right. I mean, rough sleeping is as much a crisis of mental health and addiction as it is of housing. So the 6,000 homes that we're bringing forward are also going to be accompanied by wraparound care. So individuals will have support workers who will be checking in on them sometimes every day, making sure that they are okay, that they are relearning how to go about, some aspects of daily life, like going to the shops, getting training and work and so on. But above all, getting the health support that they need on mental health and addiction. And, if we can help people both to be housed, but then also give them the care that they need, we have a good chance of something positive coming out of, the very difficult situation that we found ourselves in with coronavirus. This really is, I think, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reduce the number of people who sleep rough on our streets, because for the first time in my lifetime, we have most of those people in safe accommodation. We know where they are, we know who they are, and we've been spending the last few weeks getting to know them and their particular health conditions so that we can support them in the future.
Well, you talk about a very difficult situation. There's something of a tricky situation for the government right now. We're in a situation where latest Office for National Statistic figures suggest we are in a situation with 64,000 excess deaths since the beginning of March related to COVID, or excess deaths that have happened, people not getting hospital treatment or going to A&E or their GP. We know people are still living on lockdown. Our economy is completely tanked. Lots of problems. And yet so many of the headlines in recent days have been about the Prime Minister's senior advisor, Dominic Cummings, and his breach of lockdown rules. Given that the British public, 66% of them say he should resign, including most Tory voters and most Leave voters, and 80% believe that he did break lockdown rules, is it time for the Prime Minister to ask him to go?
Well, look, Dominic Cummings gave his explanation. The Prime Minister then asked him to do that publicly, to answer questions from the media, which he did on Monday for almost an hour. The Prime Minister believes that he acted reasonably, that he acted within the law. And I think although many people in the country would disagree with the decisions that Dominic Cummings took, I think people can understand the motivation, which was to protect his unwell wife, to protect his young child, and to ensure that he didn't spread the virus, that they self-isolated as a family. And I understand that. I'm not going to judge him and his family for the decisions that they
Aren't
took.
you? Why? Wait a second. The law. Wait a minute. He was part of a government that was putting in place rules to keep us all safe, and yes, the law does judge us when we break those laws. I mean, if 80% of the British public, having
Julia,
watched what he had to say, said that he did break the lockdown rules, does that mean we're all stupid?
No, I think you have to be careful in what you're saying. He abided by the guidelines and acted within the law.
No, he didn't.
You might disagree with the decisions that he and his family took.
Yes, because he broke the law.
You can understand that they were taken, in a difficult and challenging circumstance, as many, many other people have faced across the country. But he did act within the guidelines, and so I think it's reasonable that he continues in post. But as you say, this has been distracting, and now it's important that we move on and focus on the other issues.
But we're not going to be able to move on, are we? You say he acted in difficult and challenging circumstance. His wife was ill, and they had one child. In what way is that a difficult or challenging circumstance for anyone in this country, any more than the many millions of people who also get ill and have a child? What made his circumstances so exceptional? They weren't even both ill. They certainly weren't both very ill. There is nothing that makes his circumstances exceptional.
Dominic Cummings hasn't said that he's exceptional. Nobody is above the law.
Yes, he has. These are his defences. There was an exception to the rule about lockdown, which enabled him to drive his family across the country and break the lockdown rules. That's what he claimed.
No, it wasn't exceptional for him. The guidelines said that if you have children, you should try to follow the rules to the best of your ability, but you have to balance that with protecting your children. I think we can all understand that. That's a natural and common sense.
When was his child at risk?
Well, he was concerned that if both his wife and he became unwell, and he thought that was a strong likelihood.
Why did he think that was a strong likelihood?
They both did become unwell, that he would be best placed to look after his children.
Well, why did someone who had sat in on the SAGE committee hearings, knowing that the vast majority of people who get coronavirus have no symptoms whatsoever, and the largest percentage of those who do get it have only mild symptoms, why did he think they would both become so ill, they would both be completely incapacitated to unable to look after their child? He knew that actually the statistics said quite the opposite.
Well, he did become very unwell.
She didn't, though.
Fortunately,
she didn't. She was perfectly capable of taking care of their child.
Full recovery. They were able to do that whilst balancing concern for their young child. As I say, I think opinions clearly vary on this. Many people disagree with the judgment that he took. You obviously do, but it was within the guidelines, which enabled you to use that degree of discretion when looking after children. Now the point, I think, is how can we move forward? Certainly my focus as a cabinet minister is on the other issues that we've just been talking about, like rough sleeping, controlling.
Well, yes, and we should be moving forward. But hold on a minute, hold on a minute, Mr. Jenrick. We can't move forward. We can't move forward if we as a public are being taken as fools. Now, there'll be many people listening right now shouting at the radio saying they completely agree with you. But 80% of people, according to the polls, after hearing Dominic Cummings talk for an hour, giving his version of events, say they think he broke the lockdown rules. The poll ratings for the Conservative Party have plunged. The poll ratings for Boris Johnson personally have plunged. Should he, even if you think that Dominic Cummings did nothing wrong, even if you genuinely believe, and I'm sorry, I don't know how anyone can genuinely believe he did nothing wrong in this circumstance, or that he has an exception. I genuinely don't understand that. Even if that were the case, do you think it's a good idea for the Prime Minister, during a pandemic, to have an advisor who people think is a liar and who's a lawbreaker, and waste his political capital like that?
Well, the Prime Minister has sat down with Dominic Cummings, has listened at length to his explanation. He believes it's reasonable within the guidelines and within the law. And I, as a cabinet minister, I'm going to take my leave from that. I've also listened to the explanation. I do think that the trip to Durham was within the guidelines. We've just discussed why that's the case. But my priority now is that we do devote our energy to the things that matter most to the country. Certainly in my area, that's things like rough sleeping that we've just been discussing. I think it is now the right time for us to move on. And the Prime Minister later today will be before members of Parliament at the liaison committee, no doubt discussing Dominic Cummings, but also, and I hope this will be the focus of questioning, the broader response to coronavirus and how we move forward as a country. And that's what matters now.
OK, well, let's talk about what matters to people in terms of getting back to some sort of ordinary life, getting back to work. How confident are you that we're going to have this test and trace system in place on the 1st of June, ready for primary schools to go back, ready for shops to start thinking about reopening, lots of businesses going back? Lots of people are really concerned that the government hasn't actually got the sort of safeguards in place that countries like Germany and South Korea have had in place to release their lockdowns before we are planning for us all to come out of our homes.
Well, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, will be saying more about this later today, but we do now have the plan in place and ready to go next week. It will be a world-class system. Clearly, it will take a bit of time to test and make sure that we're making all the right calls, but it has all the potential to do what you just described by identifying in a sophisticated way where there are flare-ups and taking action in each of those cases. We're able to open up the rest of the country and help millions of people to return to work, return to school, to go about their daily business. It will be a sophisticated system. The app will be one element of it, but there'll also be the contact tracers, and we've hired now 24,000 of them, and we'll be using local councils as well, and their expertise and knowledge of local communities to make sure that we're taking action whenever we see the rate of infection rising in one particular place.